and get going on this next session, discussion session this afternoon. Welcome. My name is Jan Hartmans. I'm at the University of California, Davis. My background is I teach and do research in soil science and in irrigation water management. And I'm at the same time, I'm also in one of the associate deans in the college, and it's because of that maybe it was maybe 2 months ago or so when Bill Collins came by the campus and suggested this very exciting idea of this Climate Readiness Institute, and we, in Davis, we are very excited to actually be in the position to collaborate and work with Stanford, UC Berkeley, and the Berkeley National Lab in this effort. And so certainly not only in agriculture, although we are the premier, as you know, we have the premier college in agriculture. We have institutes, Agriculture Sustainability Institute, the Urban Horticulture Institute and Center, and others, but also in other areas. So we have centers like the Watershed Center. We just have developed and expanded the Coastal Marine Science Institute, and we have other institutes that could really be part of this. Of course, when we talk about climate change, we, at least many of us, I think immediately about water. And so there's these two parts to it. There is either the drought, which is what we experienced not too long ago, and I think we're still in the drought. But that really raises public awareness in terms of having safe drinking water, and the stream flows, the minimum stream flows, and then the other side is the vulnerability to flooding and so on. Sea level rise, of course, and the Pineapple Express, as it comes by, and what's happening there. And you hear maybe from my speech, I'm not from here originally. I'm from the Netherlands, the lowland, right? And so we were hearing this morning that the levees here are built for once in 100 years, and so in my home country, the levees were built, developed, and built after the big flood in '53 in the 50s and 60s. The level, likely, with the probability of flooding once in 10,000 years. Now, that has go by the wayside, right? Because that was developed when there was no climate change on the horizon. And so, what are we doing now? You know what we're doing in the Netherlands? We're building 4 feet to all the levees. So exactly as was discussed this morning, that should be, that's the direction. Well, why do we do that? I mean, we heard that, we should be careful and maybe not going that far. However, I think in that part of the world, we hardly have a choice. So yes, we can timeline it, but I think, but it's immediate in many ways. So we do a lot of other work, I think, as well, but there's no time left to really do that. So they started building these levees already. Okay, with that, what I would like to do is briefly introduce the panel. So we'll do that, and then I introduce the facilitator, Andrew, with that. So I do that fairly brief because time is relatively short. Jay Lund is the first. So Jay is the Krohn Professor of Environmental Engineering in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at UC Davis. He's the director of the Watershed Sciences Center. And really in the past weeks and months, he really has developed to be the spokesperson, I believe I can say that safely, for issues on water on our campus. So it's great for Jay to be here. The second speaker is Grant Davis. He's the general manager of the Sonoma County Water Agency, responsible for many of the management activities relating to the core functions on water delivery, wastewater, flood protection, and environmental sustainability. He currently serves, and we just talked about it, on the President's Advisory Commission for the Division of A&R here in California, and he's board member of the California Utility Executives and Managers Association. So I think Grant's main focus is on water management. I think if I talk with Jay, I think more and more on water supply. At least that's how I think about it. Peter Glick here is the leading expert, innovator, and communicator really in water resources. I think he developed the idea of peak water. He's the director of the Pacific Institute here in Oakland. He has on many communications, publications, books. I know him best, and he was editor of the biannual report a number of years on the world's water resources, and it was really valuable information, data globally on water and fresh water. Finally, Steve Hartmeyer, he's the Chief Executive Officer of Oasis, just recently started there introducing novel products to the agriculture market and advancing crop and soil sciences to address the current challenges on irrigated agriculture. So I think Steve would talk maybe more on water use efficiency, I can see that, whereas maybe Peter would be more on water conservation and policy. So what will we have is water supply, water management, water conservation, a policy, and water efficiency. I think we have the whole thing over here. So with that, I'd like to introduce our facilitator, Andrew Gunter. He actually did his degree here at UC Berkeley, Executive Coordinator of the Bay Area Ecosystems Climate Change Consortium. And with that, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Jan. All right, so in case some of you weren't in the session this morning, the routine here is we're going to ask our experts to frame for us the challenges and the opportunities that CRI might address, and then have group discussions at the tables where we will develop some ideas that we'll then share back with the group, and with responses from our experts try and frame some high priorities for CRI to focus on. Remember that each of you has in front of you your own little private recommendation sheet, and if an idea comes to you and you guys can't talk about it at the table or whatever, please fill those out, because they will all be collected. And I hope that bubbling up at each table out of the goodness of your heart is somebody who is going to be the note taker and reporter of your group's activities to the group when we reconvene after the table sessions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, who I believe is Jay.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here. Just have a few remarks on climate change and related to water. I was teaching a class, short course up in Sacramento today for some people in DWR, and it was the first real session of the class, and I usually have my graduate students read a really wonderful piece of work on water management, advanced water management, by Sextus Julius Frontinus on the water supply of the city of Rome in 97 AD. And you can see in that treatise that he has all the problems that he had, and really that our problems in many ways are not different. He was trying to adapt the Roman water supply to changes in the political realm and all kinds of things going on in the institutional realm. And it occurred to me driving down here after that discussion, has there ever been a time in history when water managers managed a stationary system in a broad sense? Now, we often have thought that we managed water in a climatically stationary system, but there's so many other things that go into real water management systems: finance, demographics, economic structure, all kinds of things. We have never managed stationary systems. So this idea that stationarity is dead, well, it was never alive. It was sort of a naive idea that our water systems will be stationary. We have a new wrinkle that has become popular on stationarity regarding climate. Just another thing, in my mind, just another thing that's not stationary. Some sort of fun points, I think. Californians have experienced abrupt climate change before. Most of the ancestors of people that now inhabit California came from back east. Anybody here come from back east? How many of you experienced abrupt climate change when you came here? I know Jan did. I was in the Netherlands a couple of years ago. We were there for 5 weeks. They had 4 weeks without rain. They considered that to be a drought. When you look at how the civilization that came here and took over the place from the east managed, they had to change all of their water laws, change how they do agriculture. It required them to have tremendous change in a lot of things, and it took them 50 years really to get their act together. Climate change is not the only thing that's changing. We have tremendous change in economic structure, certainly since the gold mining era to the agricultural era to now the post-agricultural era of California's economy. We've gone from, in the last 30 or 40 years, from agriculture being 30% of employment in California to less than 5%. So that really changes our susceptibility to drought, thank goodness, today, and has a lot of other things that change our water management and what we're expecting out of water management, particularly environmentally. Climate change. Will we ever know what the climate change is going to end? You know, the end state is going to look like? Will it ever stop changing? Probably not to both. I think about this for flood control. You know, we won't know how climate change is going to change flood frequencies until we've collected, you know, probably 50 years of data. You know, so long after we're dead is when we're going to know what it's really gone to. And as water managers, I think that's just something we have to live with. Climate changes now. It's certainly clear in the hydrologic record that we've seen shifts in runoff from the spring into the winter season because of less proportion of snowfall and snowpack. California is prone to very massive climate change. It's been wonderful to see in the press all the mentioning of the sort of medieval droughts that occurred, a couple of 100-year droughts in Southern California at least, back in medieval times. Really tremendous droughts. One thing that I probably can't say enough these days, people like to talk about storage. It seems that there's a tremendous proportion of our society and polity that thinks that, oh, if you have a water problem, you have to throw a bunch of concrete in the middle of a river someplace, and somehow that will produce water as a magic of sort of like by alchemy almost. That doesn't do you any good unless you have water coming into it. So I think we really need to sober ourselves up in terms of looking at storage. Most of the really good storage sites in California already have dams on them. We have the most expensive, least productive ones left to dam from a purely water yield sense. You know, then you get to the economics and the environmental side of things as well. A couple of last points. Hand-wringing is not adaptation. We have a tremendous amount of hand-wringing in this field. Oh, the climate is changing. Oh, come on, get over it. Of course it's going to change. A lot of things are going to change. We need to really get serious about how we organize as a society to do this. Otherwise, we'll be sort of like Australia did back in their big, long drought, where they got several years into their 12-year drought. They decided they need to build desalination plants everywhere. Well, the drought ended. They're still paying for those desalination plants. And those costs are coming out of something else that they would have probably rather be doing with that money. And then the last point I'd like to make is we have a tremendous value, given the tremendous non-stationarity we have in many aspects of water management, on flexibility. It's really amazing what California can do and what Californians have done with water management in a good way when they have the flexibility. It's often very difficult for us to get flexibility these days for a lot of good reasons and a lot of bad reasons. It's often a noisy process to get flexibility. And that's probably as it should be, given the many interests in water. But we live in a non-stationary world in many ways. We're going to need to be non-stationary in our management and in some of our policies. And over time, that will surprise us. Thank you.
Facilitators love speakers who finish early. All right, Grant is next, and I think we can. Are we up there?
First one. How about one before that? There we go.
Okay.
Thanks, Andy. And Jay, nice job. Jan, thank you for the introduction. I'm Grant Davis. I'm the general manager of the Sonoma County Water Agency, and it's wonderful to be here at Climate Readiness Institute, birthing of this fine idea. And what you have on my opening slide here, and I will try and stay within the time allotted as well, is just last weekend, Saturday. That is an atmospheric river. You hear about this in the news quite a bit, but I put it as one of my top bullets. Working with the Weather Service and NOAA and folks down at Scripps, we were able to show what we experienced up in Sonoma County. Because we've been talking about drought. It's been drought all the time. In fact, there is a drought, and we say turn your water off. But over this last weekend, I was talking about sanitation and flood control and working all night with our guys trying to make sure the lift stations would be able to treat the wastewater and not have any overflow. We get about 50% of our rainfall up on the coast in Sonoma County off these atmospheric rivers, and we've got to understand them better. So what you see here is a virtual Pineapple Express, and that upper side there going right in to Sonoma County and California is what dropped about 20 inches of rain on Mount Tam, closer to 9 inches up in the Santa Rosa Basin. And we need to understand these suckers. So that is going to be probably my priority for the foreseeable future. How can we tell water managers when these are coming, where they're going to land, how much they're bringing, and what the duration is going to be. And if we can do that, we might just be able to bend those rule curves that the Army Corps of Engineers uses to determine flood releases. And so that is one that I can confidently say, working with Scripps and NOAA Weather, USGS, and folks that are looking at how the Department of Water Resources right now has done a phenomenal job with their state climatologist helping us guide through this. So that's one that if we can get better research, and I'd prosper, going to be important to the whole state. Next, I'm looking at something along the lines of climate change studies and adaptation. And we're in the process in Sonoma County of embarking upon a vulnerability analysis, getting some help looking at adaptation policies. And in our own case, you're looking at things about natural assets in the upper watershed, your built environment, and what we're going to respond to. So my overarching message here is that we as water managers throughout the state are going to have to manage to variability. And Jay mentioned flexibility. So vulnerability would be my next item, and that is we have extreme weather events that are occurring for multiple years of dry weather, and right upon that, a very flashy system dealing with floods just on the back end. And we have to manage accordingly. And a lot of the infrastructure that we've inherited obviously was not built to do that. So being able to reoperate our reservoirs, being able to get the gauges out there, work with advanced technologies to actually identify what these river systems are doing and how they're going to affect the Bay Area is another area I would posture that we're going to need to do the planning for, that this institute could be equally well prepared for. And then I can't help but talk about what water agencies and water managers and counties and communities can do more of. And that is, we've set a goal by 2015 to achieve carbon-free water. And that would be one that every molecule that the water agency delivers to its customers, about 6,000 strong, would do it with a renewable resource. And we're right on the cusp of achieving that. We've invested in solar. You're looking at hydro. You're looking at all kinds of energy sources, landfill gas, biomass, bioenergy. But to be honest, the only way we're going to achieve this is by taking advantage of what we worked on for the last couple of years, creating a Sonoma Clean Power, which is going to be a municipal power enterprise that, working on 100% renewable, we'll be purchasing our last increment, getting off our PG&E meters to do that. So Water Agency is here to say that we're not unique. We certainly have a board of directors that wants us to be more engaged in climate adaptation because we have to be. But at the same time, we can hold ourselves up as one of those entities that can help bring the other utilities along. I see David Behar back there from SFPUC, another huge leader in climate adaptation. In fact, when I look at the tables, every one of you is involved. You wouldn't be here. So I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. So I would put my own 2 cents in on saying that we have to do more integrated planning. We have to be looking further ahead, much as Andy was talking about and Jan about thinking multi-year, and look at the political apparatus. I just came back from the water bond hearing up in Sacramento this morning, and I predict there's going to be a water bond this year. It's a matter of what's going to be in it, and that's where the rubber hits the mat. So are we going to be smarter about what we actually include, smart technologies, things that can deliver water right now that are going to actually rebuild systems, or are we going to be doing more damage and building things that are going to be putting us in a further deficit? That remains to be seen. But I think Climate Readiness Institute and groups that are involved here could actually be a part of leading the way. And I'm really honored to be here and hopefully get into a nice, healthy discussion. So thank you.
Hey, Grant, you have 600,000 customers.
How many did I say?
6,000.
Well, at this rate, we'll be down that far if I don't do a better job.
Thank you, Grant. Our next speaker is Dr. Peter Glick.
Can I close this? Or is that going to cause chaos? Probably going to cause chaos. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here. I have a short period of time also. I just want to make 3 points. The first is I'm going to talk about peak water. I think in California and in other parts of the world, we're reaching what I call peak water. I'll talk about what that means. The second thing is a new component of our water challenge is this issue of climate and energy, I would add. And integrating climate and energy into the way we think about water is a new problem. The third thing I'm going to talk about is solutions. I think there are ways of rethinking the way we deal with water. Whether or not we move in that direction remains to be seen, but there are opportunities out there, so I'll touch briefly on those. So peak water. The idea of peak water is simply that there are limits to the amount of water that is available for us to do the things we want to do. In some work that I and my colleagues have done at the Pacific Institute, we've talked about peak renewable water, peak non-renewable water, peak ecological water, all of the different components, which basically mean when you have renewable water resources, you still run into limits. A river's a renewable system, but you can't have any more water than the river provides. Once you use it all, you're reaching limits. And think about the Colorado River. We'd love to have more water out of the Colorado River, but I'm sorry, we use it all. Peak non-renewable water is really what we're doing in the Central Valley with groundwater. When we have non-renewable water systems, groundwater, where we pump it faster than nature recharges it, you can't have any more. And in California, that's unfortunately also a critical part of our challenge as well. And peak ecological water is the idea that we run into ecological limits that constrain what we can do. And again, look at California. We have a growing challenge from the ecological perspective of satisfying human demands for water and what we now understand are critical ecological needs as well. And think about the Bay Delta as that challenge. So on top of that problem with our water system, that we don't sustainably manage it, we now have climate change. Jay says, in reference to a fairly famous article a couple of years ago entitled "Stationarity is Dead," that stationarity was never really alive. But the truth is we built our system under certain assumptions that were stationary, that we were going to get a certain amount of variable, wet years and dry years, certain amount of water, but that we were going to build concrete, and that concrete locked us into a certain kind of a system. And that system now we understand better has to be more flexible. It takes water to produce our energy. It takes energy to produce our water. That's a climate issue. And in the last couple of years, there's been a growing interest in this energy-water nexus, it's called, mostly focused on the water requirements for our energy systems. Can we continue to produce the energy we want given water constraints? And there's some discussion about that in California with renewables and big central solar systems in Southern California. But it also takes energy to collect, treat, distribute our water. And one of the things that Grant mentioned is the growing challenge that water agencies have with producing carbon-free water, if you will. And I think that's a really interesting way to think about it. But we have to think about how to reduce the amount of energy required to produce the water services that we want, and in particular, how to reduce the carbon energy that provides those water services. Finally, we have an opportunity to rethink what we do with water. We're in a drought, in many ways an unprecedented drought. The atmospheric river helped us a little bit, but not that much. We need 4, 5, 6 of those if we're going to even get back to normal, and I think that's unlikely. The drought offers us an opportunity to really integrate some of these challenges, to rethink our water system. If the drought ends next month, we won't. We'll go back to doing what we've always done, which doesn't really work anyway, but that's the story. But if the drought continues, and it's a drought next year, and a drought the year after that, we're going to have to do what the Australians did, which is at the end of their 9-year drought, or however long it lasted, they were fundamentally doing things differently. They had discussed new water rights laws and ecosystem regulation and surface and groundwater integration and water pricing and really restricted urban water use. And they built desalination plants that are now not only being paid, was that Jay? You talk about the desalination plants? Not only are they still paying for those plants, they've mothballed 5 of the 6 plants because they can't afford the water that they produce. That's another story. So the opportunity, how much time do I have? So the opportunities for changing our water policy mean rethinking surface and groundwater together. It's sort of an embarrassment that we still in California have no groundwater management law. monitoring, metering. That has to change, and someday it will change, and maybe this drought will encourage that change. And if we manage surface and groundwater together, that offers enormous advantages. We have to rethink supply. We're not going to build more concrete infrastructure, more dams. We might build one or two, but our problems will remain identical if we do that. But there are new sources of supply. We treat a tremendous amount of wastewater, 5 or 6 million acre feet a year, and we throw it away. We use a little bit of it, maybe 10%, but we throw it away. That's an enormous asset. We have a lot of storm water that Grant was trying to manage this weekend. We could figure out ways of capturing and using storm water. There's brackish groundwater that could be desalinated at relatively low cost in certain parts of the state. We could think about ocean water desalination. We're building one plant. So there are new supply options. But there's enormous opportunity on the demand side, and the Pacific Institute's worked extensively on this. The reality is we waste a lot of the water that we spend a lot of money collecting and putting to use. We use it inefficiently. And urban and agricultural communities have made enormous progress at reducing those inefficiencies. We use less water in California today than we used 30 years ago, and our economy's grown, our population's grown, but we still could improve the efficiency of water use enormously in the agricultural sector, in the urban sector. We could talk about what we grow and where we grow it. We could talk about some complicated things that we don't really want to talk about. But there are opportunities to do things differently. And I'll just close by suggesting that maybe the Institute, the Climate Readiness Institute, could think about this water, energy, climate, food connection and integrate those communities, the academic communities, maybe the policy communities, in ways that have not been integrated, bring together information and discussions. Maybe we ought to have a workshop about taboos, the things we refuse to talk about in the water area, and talk about them. There are enormous opportunities, and I think we'll talk some more about some of those opportunities at the table, and I look forward to those conversations. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. And Steve Hartmeyer is our last speaker.
Thank you. So I'm coming from the side or vision of more near-term water opportunities. Although when you look at other speakers, they talk about how things, have they really changed? I'm reminded of when I was growing up in Salinas in the 70s, and my mother reminded me to go out and make sure I collected the last rinse water that was coming out of her washing machine, because she had this very old mired lemon tree out in the backyard. And because we were in a drought and you had no landscape watering in the 70s, I was going to collect this water and go out and make sure her tree survived, because she had great lemons. The tree's still alive, by the way, today. And then I thought about 10 years later, after I was glad to see all the UC Davis guys on the panel, because after I graduated from Davis and decided I didn't want to live in Salinas where the temperature had about a 10-degree change all year round, and was living in Sacramento, I remember in the mid-'80s my father calling me up and asking me what I was doing to protect his daughter-in-law, because he had read that Interstate 80 was flooded around the Fairfield area. Interstate 5 north around Yuba City was also closed due to flooding. I-5 and I-80 were closed as well because of snow. And Interstate 5 south of Sacramento was also closed due to flooding. And what I was going to do to get my daughter-in-law, his daughter-in-law, my wife, but it was his daughter-in-law, out of Sacramento, because he had heard they were getting ready to blow levees on the west side of the bypass to keep the city from flooding. So when you think about it, and think about climate change, we can debate what climate change happens. The reality is water is central to that, and it's not black and white. We were speaking this week, we had some kids come over, some very bright minds in chemistry classes as a startup. We don't donate money to schools, but we invite them in to see current science and what's happening. And these chemistry class, I started off saying that chemistry and nothing is black and white, it's gray. And I asked them if they wanted, there was a product called dihydromonoxide. And there was a ban on the web, there was a petition to ban dihydromonoxide. because some of you are laughing and some of you are looking and like, oh, okay. Because it caused massive property damage and sometimes could force the evacuation of towns. It also, with overconsumption, can cause you to stop breathing and can make your mind shut down. And I asked him how many of them wanted to ban dihydromonoxide, and the whole class raised their hand. Then I pointed out that what dihydromonoxide was, but I said if you break it apart, you have hydrogens and water, which are very flammable. So dihydromonoxide was used to put out the breakdown product of it. So in my mind, climate change, we can debate all what it is, but the reality is near term, we have a water problem. If you look at California ag economy, it's the 5th largest in the world. We talk about healthy eating, better nutrition for kids, overweight kids. The California ag economy provides all the fruits, the vegetables, the nuts that we're asking the population to eat more of. So the question with water is, if you start wanting to restrict it to ag economies, where are you going to get the fruit and vegetable and nuts, considering most of it comes from California to feed the United States and a lot of places the world? So where are you going to ban that or stop that? So then you say, well, why are we in this situation? Well, the California voting population is where ag isn't. It's along the coast. And that's what regulates. We can debate whether we have supply, infrastructure, et cetera. The reality is, as you pointed out, I don't think it would ever be funded because the voting population is totally disconnected with where they're getting their food and how they're getting it and how it's supplied to them. So the real question comes up is, how did we get here? Well, there was an interesting article from the Hoover Institute that said the last major supply source in the state was happened when the population was 20 million people less than it is today. So we've added 20 million people to the population consuming water since the last supply. But we're much more efficient doing that. The other question that comes up is, again, in this gray area, we talked about energy. The largest individual consumer of energy in the state is rumored to be the pumps that pump water over the Tehachapies into the LA basin. So you say, what are we going to do with water in LA when the biggest consumer is supplying them, but they vote to determine what water projects going forward? So long term, there's going to be, I think personally, water is a finite resource. It's in short supply in California. And from an industry standpoint, what benchmarks in California carries around the world. So I think what happens in this region, in this state, will set the standards, in a lot of cases, what happens around the world in the long term. Short term, we're looking at how do you improve efficiency short term, and how do you become more efficient, because the longer term solutions will eventually come. There's a lot of bright minds in this room and in the world. But short term, the question is, how do we, in this short term, in a drought, which I think will continue. If you go back and look, we've been in a drought for 10 years. We just phrased it differently. But basically, we're in a long-term drought in the state of California. How do you get short-term solutions that can address the fact that there is not enough water in this state? Thank you.
Okay, so our next step now is to take time at our tables. And I'd like to invite each of our speakers to join one of the tables. And we can, we'll have, I guess over here, you can join whichever table you want. And to really, for us now to think about, given the framing that we've just heard, the opportunities, the challenges that face California, what is it that you all think CRI would be the most important things for them to do? And so we'll discuss this for about half an hour. Then I hope there will be a reporter from each table who can give us 2 or 3 of the top recommendations that came from each table, and then we'll ask our panel to be here and we'll discuss these further. Okay, everybody. So if we can wind up the discussions in the next minute, please, and we'll move on. All right, everybody. I hate to end these fascinating discussions. It was very fun to wander table to table and just kind of listen in. So what we'll do now is we're going to go, in each table will give us a report, just 2 or 3 of the most the ideas that you all had that seemed to be the most important to you. I would encourage each reporter to try and speak in as concise phrases as possible to help our to help us capture the ideas. So should we start here, Johan?
So I have a lot of notes here, but so I think, but I do have 3 main bullets here, but they go along and integrate, I think. So the question that we asked ourselves was how can the universities solve the water problem in California? And so that's how it started. And really what that came out is we really need to better collaborate, integrate, the knowledge that we have. And that goes then to systems hydrology, looking at, but then focus, of course, on the Bay Area. So how, what is that system, and how can we then pull all the information together? And included that the stakeholders, so the public in general, of course, as well, and look at both modeling and data. And that then translated into looking more in the modeling, the forecasting, so and that then went into, well, the groundwater could be extremely important, also even for the Bay Area. And so it's not that, most of the potential recharge happens in the valley, but that recharge can offset a lot of the needs, the water needs in the Bay Area. So in that way, it indirectly affects the water supply. The second main issue was integration, the need to integrate, and this is more broadly, integrate science with policy. And of course, and all of us can contribute to that. And so examples were given like the Pacific Institute, the Berkeley Water Institute. So there's some pieces meal happening that already, but how can we, the CRI, be a facilitator and the seed to make that happen? So bring the science, like I talked about before in the first bullet, and then focus on the policy in the Bay Area and on solutions, and solutions for the region. Then the conversation went into a more like, okay, but what are the questions? And so really maybe we should ask what would happen, what would be the impact for us if there would be no water? And that might be more people, public and agencies would maybe, or policy would understand that better. And so then the question is, how do you answer that and translate the knowledge that we have, to do the story like we talked about this morning. And so with that then also came the comment that, we should maybe not think about the average changes in climate and water availability, but really think about the extreme events, the extreme cases, the droughts and the flooding. So how we address those. So a lot of the thinking would focus on that. And then the final bullet, I have this number 4, but maybe it could be part of number 3. Accelerate the policy making. So in other words, we're all thinking, and we're wringing our hands and things are happening, but how can we actually, provide the information and accelerate to make policy for that?
Thank you. So who's there? Alex?
Okay, we started off somehow focusing on recycling and the opportunity that it provides, and if CRI could play a role there. And that sort of migrated to a discussion about reframing the public's perception. We learned that the artichokes we eat are irrigated with sewage treated water, right? Treated water. And then we talked about that we needed a new euphemism for treated water. And that whole, we all kind of went yuck, where, no more artichokes for us. But that makes the point that, if we, so anyway, an opportunity to reframe and to bring in some of the social sciences that came up in a conversation this morning as well, to help the public kind of feel better or understand some opportunities around water that we don't maybe want to think about. Anyway, secondly, we talked about focusing on the 9-county region, and I don't know a lot about this personally, but I know there's just all kinds of different agencies and policies, and I guess we learned that if you live in Menlo Park, you have one water policy, but if you drive across the street in Palo Alto, there's another one. And could CRI play a role in examining or rationalizing these agencies and the policies around that? Does that capture it? So again, playing that regional convener role that maybe no one else can, or maybe someone already else is. Maybe ABAG's already all over this. I don't know. Whatever those jurisdictions might be. And then the third one was around, we threw out the idea of, well, what about the distribution networks? And then that got expanded to technology more broadly. And looking at the whole stream from production to use to reuse. But understanding, is there a way to, again, if there's a surplus of water in Marin this weekend because we got 20 inches of rain on Mount Tam, and Cloverdale is going dry, are there some longer-term technology or distribution solutions that the CRI could play a role in? And I think, team, did I catch it? And of course, because we love to convene, we suggest we convene.
Okay. If I could ask our speakers to come back up to the table so that we're going to have a discussion when we're done reporting here. Who do we have from this table? Okay.
We spent our time interrogating our leaders from the water agencies. It was really helpful to have them at our table. So we have a list, and it's a little bit more than 3, but I'll run through it quickly. First was information to help water agencies make good water management systems, and I think there's an alignment between federal resources and tools with state and regional and local. It was brought up, NOAA it seems to be East Coast centric, and that it's largely hurricane focused, but that that atmospheric rivers are our hurricanes, and how are we having West Coast kind of tools to help us deal with our weather patterns here. And then there was a conversation about the fragmentation of water agencies, and could CRI actually begin to explore what the right scale is to deal with these issues and governance structures, and how to deal with that fragmentation, especially around issues about outdated infrastructure to deal with our changing weather patterns, and then this issue that came up around managing surface and groundwater together, and then how do we respond to emergencies, and are we set up to respond to that with our current structures? Science should drive the decision-making process, and that there's actually very limited kind of ways that we're using science to inform decisions currently. And one example, the California Water Plan update happens every 5 years. It's done by DWR. It could really benefit from having some scientific or outside voices to help influence how that's put together. And then there was a conversation too about agriculture, and are there ways to inform the types of crops that we're growing in California based on kind of the weather patterns and conditions as they change due to climate. Anything else yeah, one more. The need to value our natural resources as assets. So is this something CRI can do around valuing natural capital, mapping our current systems, and pulling the information together around that? And how are we using those to the best of our abilities?
Well, a lot of coincidence with the other groups, but our three were to focus first of all on climate service provision, so not just knowledge and knowledge base and data, but actually a way to filter that data and provide interpretation and guidance to decision makers how they need to use it. Finding those subset of academics who are great translators and having them co-produce this information with the users. And really taking advantage of the fact that at the scale we're working, we can do this through face-to-face interactions and a regular commitment to get together, not just a project to do this once, but an ongoing, sustained commitment. And then finally, for our decision makers to work towards defining best practices in adaptation so that there is a knowledge base on that, and tying in the economic and funding mechanisms, especially developing case studies that are financing against cost savings, so that we're, if I'm getting this right, we're having a knowledge base about how to get these projects done from the economic and policy point of view.
All right, thank you very much. So I first wanted just to ask our panelists if any of the four of you had a response to things that you just heard. Were there things that you thought were particularly important, or common themes that you heard that you wanted to comment on? I mean, one of the, Peter,
Yeah, so, well, obviously the common themes are, seem to be integration and collaboration and facilitation, and maybe that's just because that's just what I want to hear. But part of the problem we've faced in the last decade or so is the failure to do those things. We don't, water utilities and energy utilities don't talk very well to each other. Urban agencies and agricultural agencies don't talk very well to each other. The academic community and the non-academic communities don't always talk very well to each other. So if there's a role for the Climate Readiness Institute to help cross some of those barriers, I think that's sort of what we heard is integration and collaboration and facilitation. So anyway, just a comment.
I was struck as I went table to table hearing about the social science of wastewater reuse. And this was a theme that came up earlier this morning too, was the need to have integration too between the physical and the engineering and the social sciences to make advances in policy. And were there anyone in the room here who wanted to share a comment based on anything extra they heard at their table? Yeah, Grant?
I just have a question about this collaboration idea. It came up this morning too. The idea of co-producing, I think, is really important. But at what stage and how do we actually do it? And is it at the these kinds of convenings are really great for learning from each other and that sort of thing, but we're not actually doing anything. Right? I mean, maybe we will do something, but
We're providing free advice to the
right,
Climate
we're,
Readiness Institute.
it's worth what you pay for it.
I guess I got lunch.
Right. So, I think it's around, co-production, I would like to hear others' thoughts about this, but, at what stage do we co-produce? Is it actually getting together to do proposals together? How would CRI do that? What's the framework? Do we actually get policymakers and scientists and agency decision makers together at the same time to put together an NSF proposal? Is that the kind of thing we're talking about?
Does William want to answer that? Does Bill want to answer that?
So we've been talking about co-production for years, and the way we think about it generally has been, if you're a city manager, a water manager, a public health manager, you need to know what the future holds because you know it's different than the past. And if you're doing a particular study on your own vulnerability because of heat index or water supply losses or concerns, sea level rise or whatever, you have to hunt for an expert. And there are lots of consulting firms that will say they have the experts. They don't always actually have the experts because they tend to be, in my business, more on the engineering side than on the climate side. There are some notable exceptions. And if you can afford them and find them, then great. But first of all, there isn't necessarily the reputation that you can go to. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but reputation means you're a credible source. You're not just in it for money, which is where the consulting firms sometimes have problems. And you have experience and knowledge of how to work with people like me. And so when I had to do that, I went to NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, because I know what I need is climate model expertise, and as the starting point, because I need data or information to feed into my hydrologic models, which we've built with hydrologic model expertise. But there are lots of assessments that are going to be like that in the Bay Area. There are also probably going to be some common themes for lots of different people from different jurisdictions who might or might not know each other to come together and seek the expertise that CRI might provide. So sea level rise. The ART project that BCDC funded is looking at a number of jurisdictions along the Hayward shoreline area and how to respond to to sea level rise and storm surge and wave run up and look at all these factors and figuring out how to assess vulnerability. It's a very innovative project, and they happen to have the expertise that they found to do that. And it happens to be in a consulting firm largely, I think, although maybe there's others. I don't really know. So what CRI can do is a lot more numbers of those things. If you have the expertise and the interest in taking the conversations that people want to have about their future and don't know how to have, and come to CRI for reputation, for expertise, and for the patience to have the co-production conversation, which is very iterative, very lengthy, and can have lots of translational issues just because the different disciplines that people have are coming to the table with are things like atmospheric science, policy, communications, and engineering. And those are not easy conversations to have, and CRI becomes an expert in them. There'll be lots of demand for that, I would expect.
So following up on both of those comments, something that came up in our group was we were talking about the tools that we have, and do we have guidance and incentives to adapt the tools that we have to address more policy relevant questions? And then someone said, well, we have so many tools, there's so many tools out there, so do we need another tool really? So maybe something that CRI can play a role in along these lines of co-production is to get all the right people sitting down to discuss what do we need to know, what keeps us up at night, what are we really worried about, what adaptations are we considering, but then also what capabilities do we have, what capabilities do we need to develop, if any, and essentially come up with a series of white papers on various topics that discuss what are the research needs, what are the capabilities, et cetera.
So I think this has been a very interesting discussion. I get the sense that people think that climate models are some sort of answer machine. And they're most definitely not, well, they'll pose more questions than they probably than they provide answers. With respect to this co-production issue, I mean, I think I'll tell you why I'm in this room, and it's because I want first off, I want to be useful, and so people can argue about whether I've been useful so far, but I want to be useful in a way that I have not been able to before, because essentially we've been building, this gets back to this model issue, we have models that are designed to be sort of Swiss Army knives, so they're sort of moderately good at a lot of things, but not particularly good at anything. And what I think is critical for us to move forward is not only to just think about models that are tailored actually for the problem at hand, which drawing requirements from the people who need the information. That would be completely new. I've never had a conversation with anybody who's had to use my model output about what they actually need it for. So that would be new. That would be new for me. And then the other critical thing that will be new about this institute is the systems integration part, because we have tended to produce these systems, these models, in isolation. So yes, there are a lot of them. We don't know whether or not they make anything like a sensible model for the watersheds in the Bay Area if you were to integrate them, and to integrate them with human systems and with built systems. And so the other trick behind the CRI is to not look at this from a stovepipe perspective, where each individual department is doing its own thing, but where the universities are working in partnership as a whole with the outside agencies to look at this as a system. And then I think we're doing something quite new, where we get out of this trap of whose model for groundwater is better than somebody else's groundwater model. Yeah. The question is, have you produced a sensible representation of the system as a whole? And so, yeah, I think I'm just giving you some of my thoughts about what that co-production would look like. So it's systems perspective and drawing requirements from the people who need the information for a system. That would be, I think, new, and from which we would learn a great deal. We would learn a great, that was phrased in an academic way. Our students would learn a great deal, but we also think we could be more useful. Yeah, thanks. So who wants to talk about that?
Oh, sure. Oh, okay.
I think one of the things CRI has going for it is it has the unifying principle that it can consider what the needs of the society of the Bay Area are. And if you keep going back to the needs of society, then you can work backwards from there in terms of what could be done. And if the needs are, for example, effects of sea level rise on land management and effects of climate change on water supply, you can look at the future water supply for the Bay Area as something that's dependent on a lot of things going all the way up to the snow in the Sierra Nevada. And predicting that chain reaction from the Sierra Nevada to here through the surface reservoirs and the groundwater reservoirs of the Central Valley requires quite a bit of integration and collaboration. And the expertise to do that does exist amongst these 4 institutions. So, you know, if CRI can help that happen, you know, I think that's a very worthy endeavor.
It does occur to me that in the water world, you know, we think about counties, we think about water districts, we think about hydrologic regions. We don't per se think about the Bay Area. And maybe it would be useful for this institute to think about the Bay Area, to think about a way to raise the issues and the profile and the concerns of the Bay Area from a science point of view and then from a policy point of view, but then that's a way to mobilize the agencies around the Bay Area, because these issues haven't been presented to them in a Bay Area context. I don't know, maybe that's an incentive.
Yeah, my impression is that over time, the Bay Area water utilities have been collaborating quite a bit more than they might have done in times past. Certainly, there's a lot more interties in the system, and I understand those interties are often used, not infrequently used, I should say. But I think strategically, it behooves them to think about these as a regional enterprise rather than a series of individual utility enterprises. One of my concerns for a Climate Readiness Institute is what's the money available for it? I mean, just to get down to brass tacks. Sure, we can probably convince the university to give a few bits of money for a little bit of time with the prospect that there'll be another feedstock coming in from other folks. But until there's water utilities, cities, counties, unlikely the state, unlikely the feds that would chip in on this, perhaps a little bit of foundation money. I think the scope, the financial scope of a Climate Readiness Institute is likely to be very small. And it might have to content itself to, we had some really nice ideas in the back table, I thought, of having a couple of sort of semi-annual conversations, organized conversations about climate in the Bay Area. And I think that could be really useful, at least as maybe it's the thin edge of the wedge of building something bigger, but you might be spinning off projects from that. But that seems like a tractable way to start. But I kind of like the idea of academics getting engaged in real problems. But I think for CRI, it's a pretty narrow base to operate off of in terms relative to the financial readiness of people with money to contribute to it. So I would think almost you'd have to either go small or go large, in the sense that the Bay Area doesn't just have climate problems at the regional scale. There's a lot of other interesting issues that the Bay Area has that might also benefit from the engagement, serious engagement of academics. And maybe you want to have more of a broader engagement institute rather than just focus it only on climate, but you would have a whole bunch of other social welfare, public health, all environmental issues that would come up in that kind of a broader context.
Yeah, the issue of money is going to come up in our wrap-up session, and we have talked about that quite a bit among the universities that have and the lab that have so far been engaged in this conversation. I think I agree with you. These problems are big. One of the other reasons for staying local, I'll be honest with you, is that the Bay Area happens to also be home to some extraordinarily wealthy people. And my model for how we are going to fund this solution is to get people who is in their own best interest, because their 11-figure wealth rests on the Bay Area, to pony up. So we're going to go after an endowment for the Institute. That's the only way I think the way we lower the barrier to action is by having a solid floor under the Institute that lowers the barrier to action. And that, for me, equals an endowment. So that's, I think, one of the advantages we have of living in the Bay Area is that there are enormous concentrations of capital here, which are also very socially motivated. Mm-hmm. And again, so now I've laid my cards on the table, but that's something we very much intend to pursue.
Okay, and with that, we have reached the time where it's time to wrap the session up. We'll have a 10-minute break, and we're going to be reconvening in the theater. If you have any other ideas, please use those little forms in front of you to write them down, because Bruce and his team will be collecting that, and we'll see you back across the street in 10 minutes. And thank you very much to our panel.